Let her go. The sentence didn't rise, it didn't tremble, it didn't plead. It dropped into the Winterhurst ballroom like a shard of ice, clean, final, impossible to ignore. A hand tightened around a woman's wrist, glasses stopped mid-air. Somewhere near the chandeliers, a laugh died before it could become sound. And just before the room learned who she really was, the rain began again in her memory. Because this story didn't begin beneath crystal lights. It began beneath a sky the color of wet concrete. The Winterlight Charity Gala was the kind of event that pretended to be about generosity until you looked closer and saw the truth. It was about power and who got to stand near it. The Winterhurst Hotel's ballroom glowed with warm gold and cold mirrors. The walls were dressed in white roses, but the air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and controlled hunger. Every smile had a purpose. Every handshake had a history. Near the center aisle, a man in a tailored tuxedo stood too stiffly, as if the fabric itself was holding him together. His hair was perfect, his jaw clenched like a habit. His name, spoken with admiration in tech blogs and with suspicion in boardrooms, was Dylan Cross. Beside him, Sienna Vale wore pink, as if she'd declared war on subtlety. The dress clung and shimmered and demanded attention it didn't earn. She laughed too loudly, her eyes scanning the room like a thief counting exits. And then, a woman in midnight blue stepped into the light. The dress didn't scream, it didn't need to. It moved like deep water, silent, heavy, inevitable. A necklace rested at her throat, a blue diamond that didn't sparkle so much as it watched. Dylan's face changed first. Not anger yet, not fear, just a blankness, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes insisted was real. Because the woman was Evelyn Hart, the woman he had tried to erase, the woman he had once called his wife, until he made sure she left the marriage with nothing but humiliation. Dylan took a step forward, too fast, too desperate. His fingers closed around her wrist. "You!" he hissed, voice low with rage. "You're a fraud!" The words hit her like old bruises, familiar, practiced, meant to hurt because they'd worked before. Evelyn didn't pull away, not because she couldn't, because she had learned something in the last 3 months. Sometimes the bravest thing was to stand still and let people reveal themselves. Dylan squeezed harder. Sienna leaned closer, eyes bright. "Don't let her play you, Dylan. Everyone's watching." Yes, everyone was watching. And that was exactly when a shadow fell across them, tall, calm, and colder than the marble floor. Alaric Winter. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't have to. "Let her go," he repeated. Dylan turned, ready to argue, ready to fight, ready to pretend he had control, until he met Alaric's eyes. There were men who looked powerful because they had money, and there were men who looked powerful because they didn't need to prove anything. Alaric's gaze didn't threaten, it assessed, like a judge deciding whether you were worth the effort of being punished. Dylan's fingers loosened, not by choice, by instinct. Alaric stepped between them with the quiet inevitability of a door closing. Then, with the whole ballroom holding its breath, Alaric lifted Evelyn's hand, not like a trophy, not like a possession, but like a vow made visible. And he said the words that turned Dylan's blood to ice. "My wife." The chandelier light caught the blue diamond at Evelyn's throat, and the room, so used to choosing who mattered, suddenly realized it had misjudged her. But to understand how Evelyn Hart became Evelyn Winter, we have to go back. Back to rain. Back to mud. Back to the moment a Porsche decided to make her suffering into a joke. London could be cruel in ways that felt almost polite. It didn't shout at you. It didn't grab you by the throat. It simply rained, steady, indifferent, and let the cold seep into your bones until you forgot what warmth felt like. Evelyn stood on a Mayfair pavement, her hair damp against her cheeks, her coat too thin for January. In her arms, she held a black folder wrapped in plastic, her design portfolio. The edges were worn. The plastic was crinkled and cheap, but the paper inside was precious. It was the only thing she'd kept. Not the apartment, not the furniture, Not the paintings she'd chosen and hung with care. Not even the ring that used to mean forever. 3 months ago, she had walked out of her marriage with a signature on a divorce settlement that felt like a knife disguised as ink. Dylan had made sure of that. He had smiled in court, charming, calm, the kind of man lawyers loved because he looked honest, even when he lied. Evelyn's hands still remembered the cold of the courthouse railing, still remembered how Dylan's voice had carried across the room. She didn't contribute, he'd said lightly, as if describing a broken appliance. She had hobbies. Hobbies. As if her work, her late nights sketching, her careful research into fabrics, her quiet brilliance, had been something cute, something unnecessary. As if her designs hadn't been the very thing that made his company's product launch look visionary, sleek, human. As if she hadn't been the one who taught him how to tell a story. Now she stood on the street with a portfolio and a meeting address written on a damp scrap of paper. A chance, a small one, a maybe. She could taste rain on her lips and stubbornness in her chest. Then she heard it, a low engine purr, a familiar sound that made her stomach drop before her eyes even turned. A Porsche eased around the corner, black, glossy, arrogant. Through the windshield, she saw Dylan's profile, sharp, confident, entertained by something. Beside him, Sienna Vale leaned in close, her hand resting on his arm as if she'd always belonged there. Sienna was new money with old hunger, an influencer turned investor's girlfriend, the type who wore luxury labels like armor and spoke about manifesting as if life was a shopping list. The Porsche slowed. Dylan glanced toward Evelyn and smiled. Not a real smile, not warmth. The smile of someone who recognized an inconvenience. Evelyn's breath caught. She turned slightly, instinctively angling her body to shield the portfolio from the splash of street water. She was too late. Dylan didn't just drive past. He aimed. The Porsche swerved, subtle enough to look accidental, precise enough to be deliberate, and hit a wide puddle pooled near the curb. Mud erupted like a dirty wave. It sprayed across Evelyn's coat, her trousers, her hands. It splattered up into her face. It slicked the plastic covering her folder. For a heartbeat, everything blurred. Brown water, cold shock, humiliation so sharp it tasted metallic. Inside the Porsche, Dylan laughed. Sienna laughed louder. The car didn't stop. It didn't slow. It simply glided away, leaving Evelyn standing in the rain like a punchline. Evelyn lifted a trembling hand and wiped mud from her cheek. It smeared. It never fully disappeared. The portfolio was still in her arms. The plastic had done its job, mostly, but the outside looked ruined, like her. She stared down at the mud and felt something ancient rise inside her, something that wasn't just sadness. It was fury. Not the loud kind, the kind that lived quiet and patient under your ribs, waiting for the right moment to become a storm. She swallowed, forcing her breathing to steady. Then she heard another sound behind her, not the snarl of a sports car, the low, smooth approach of something heavier, more deliberate. A Rolls-Royce Phantom rolled up beside the curb, its presence so effortless that even the rain seemed to move differently around it. The car stopped. The back door opened. A man stepped out. He wore a dark coat that looked like it had never known compromise. His hair was neatly styled, his face carved in calm lines that didn't invite familiarity. His eyes were the pale gray of winter sky, the kind that made people lower their voices without knowing why. Alaric Winter. London called him the Ice King, half joking, half afraid. He owned companies that owned companies. His name sat on charity boards and political donor lists like a quiet warning. Evelyn had only seen him once before, in a library, when she had been trying to remember who she was. Alaric looked at her now, and his gaze didn't flinch at the mud, at the ruined coat, at the humiliation clinging to her skin. He simply stepped closer and spoke in a voice that didn't waste words. Evelyn. Something in her chest cracked, not from pain, but from the strange relief of being seen. She tried to straighten, tried to pretend she wasn't shaking. "I'm fine," she said automatically. The lie sounded small in the rain. Alaric's eyes dropped to the folder. Is that your work? Evelyn held it tighter as if he might take it. It's all I have left. Alaric's jaw tightened, not in anger at her, but at whatever the street had done to her. He looked down the road where the Porsche had vanished. Then, very gently, he reached out and brushed a fleck of mud from Evelyn's sleeve with his thumb. The gesture was intimate without being romantic, careful, precise, as if he was restoring something. You shouldn't be standing here, he said. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. Where should I stand then? Alaric didn't answer that directly. Instead, he opened his coat slightly, pulled out a thick cashmere blanket from the car, and wrapped it around her shoulders as if she were something precious that had been mishandled. Evelyn froze at the warmth, at the softness, at the fact that he didn't hesitate. Then, without asking permission, Alaric lifted her. Not like a hero in a movie, like a man who had already decided her dignity mattered more than her pride. Evelyn gasped, instinctively grabbing his coat with muddy fingers. Alaric! Hold your portfolio, he said calmly. I've got you. Her cheeks burned. People will... Let them, Alaric replied, and there was something chilling in the simplicity of it. He carried her into the Rolls-Royce. The door closed. The rain became distant. Inside, the air smelled of leather and quiet. Evelyn stared at her muddy hands, shame rising again. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't... Alaric sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth through his coat. Don't apologize for what someone did to you. She looked up, startled. His eyes held hers like a promise. Tell me who it was. Evelyn hesitated. She didn't want to say Dylan's name. Speaking it felt like giving him power again. But Alaric waited without pushing, a patience that felt like a weapon in reserve. Evelyn's voice came out smaller than she wanted. My ex-husband. Alaric's gaze sharpened. The one you told me about. Yes, 6 days. It had been 6 days since she had first met him in the British Library, hiding from a storm, trying to drown her heartbreak in books and silence. 6 days since a stranger had looked at her sketches, listened without interrupting, and said, You're not broken. You're buried. There's a difference. 6 days since that stranger had become her husband. In secret, in simplicity, with no photographers and no headlines. Evelyn's life had changed so fast it still felt unreal. Alaric's hand covered hers, careful not to touch the mud. We're going home. Evelyn blinked. Home? Alaric's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Wherever you are. Evelyn's throat tightened. The Rolls-Royce began to move. Outside, London blurred into gray streaks. Inside, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in months. Safety. And underneath that safety, quiet, cold certainty. Alaric Winter didn't rescue people for fun. When he chose a side, he ended wars. The thing about being humiliated in public wasn't the mud. It was what the mud reminded you of. Evelyn sat in Alaric's penthouse later that night, wrapped in clean robes, hair damp and loose, a mug of tea warming her palms. Through the window, London glimmered like a city pretending it wasn't lonely. Alaric stood by the glass, jacket off, sleeves rolled back. He looked like a man carved from discipline. Evelyn watched him and thought of the day she had realized her marriage was a performance, and she had been cast as a prop. It hadn't been the cheating that came first. It had been the small thefts. Dylan would ask her opinion on product designs for his company, Cross-Vector Dynamics. He'd bring home prototypes and talk about user experience like it was a religion. Evelyn would sit at the kitchen table with her sketchpad, drawing curves that felt human, softening edges that looked cold, choosing colors that suggested trust. Dylan would watch. And then, in meetings, he would present her ideas as if they had appeared in his mind fully formed. When she corrected him once, gently, privately, he laughed. Babe, he said like she was a child. Don't be weird. We're a team. But teams didn't erase your name. Teams didn't make you feel guilty for wanting credit. Teams didn't call your work hobbies. The cheating came later, when Dylan began to believe his success meant he deserved more. More admiration, more attention, more women who looked like magazine covers. Sienna had arrived at a launch party wearing a grin and a dress that shone like a billboard. Dylan had introduced Evelyn as my wife, with the same tone he used for interns. Polite. Forgettable. Evelyn had smiled anyway, because she had been trained to swallow discomfort, because she believed loyalty could fix anything. Then the company started to fail. Dylan's big promises began to crack under reality. Investors asked questions. Cash flow thinned. Dylan panicked, but he didn't show it. He became cruel in private. He blamed Evelyn for distracting him, for not being supportive enough, for looking tired. He made her feel like she owed him happiness. And then, when the divorce came, he didn't just leave. He made sure she lost. He hired the best lawyers. He told stories with tears in his eyes about how unstable she'd become. He implied she'd been depressed, irrational, anything to make her seem unreliable. Evelyn walked out of court with her portfolio and a bank account that could barely pay rent. The rain that night in Mayfair had felt like the universe's confirmation. Yes, you really are alone. And then, the library. The British Library's reading room smelled like paper, dust, and stillness. Evelyn had gone there because she couldn't stand the silence of her flat. She had picked a corner seat, opened an architecture book she didn't care about, and let tears fall quietly onto her sleeve. Then a voice, low, calm, had broken her solitude. "You're holding the book upside down." Evelyn had looked up, startled, and seen Alaric Winter standing beside her with a stack of books in his arms. She'd recognized him instantly from headlines, but he didn't wear his fame the way Dylan wore his. Alaric looked almost tired. Evelyn had sniffed and fixed the book, embarrassed. "I'm not reading." "I can tell," he'd said, not unkindly. His gaze dropped to her sketch pad. "That's interesting." Evelyn's instinct had been to close it, but something in his tone, respectful, curious, not demanding, made her pause. Alaric sat across from her without asking, as if the library itself had granted permission. "What is it?" he'd asked. "Nothing," Evelyn lied. Alaric didn't argue. He simply watched as she opened the pad again, her pencil moving because stopping felt like dying. He studied her lines like they mattered. After a while, he said, "You're designing for people who are tired of being sharp. You're designing softness." Evelyn's throat tightened. "It's just practice. Practice is what people call talent when they're afraid of admitting they've never worked that hard," Alaric replied. Evelyn had looked at him then, not at the billionaire, but at the man. "What do you want?" she'd asked, wary. Alaric's eyes had been calm. "Nothing from you. I just didn't like the way you were disappearing." No one had ever said that to her. Not Dylan, not her friends who had slowly stopped calling when divorce made people uncomfortable. Not even her own reflection. Evelyn had stared down at her sketches, voice shaking. "I don't know who I am anymore." Alaric had leaned back slightly, giving her space. "That's not true. You know exactly who you are. You're just in a place that tried to convince you your name didn't matter." A silence. Then Evelyn whispered, "My ex-husband." Alaric didn't interrupt. "He took everything," she continued. "And today, he drove through a puddle like I was nothing." Alaric's jaw tightened. "And you believed him?" It wasn't a question. Evelyn swallowed. "Sometimes." Alaric's gaze held hers. "Then let me give you something he can't take." "What?" "A new name," Alaric said simply. "Not because you need saving, because you need a shield while you build yourself again." Evelyn stared. "That's insane." Alaric nodded once. "Yes." "Why would you do that?" she demanded. Alaric's voice dropped. "Because I know what it's like to be underestimated until it becomes a habit. And because I'm tired of watching people like him win by default." Evelyn laughed then, weak, disbelieving. "Are you proposing to me in a library?" Alaric's eyes didn't change, but something softer moved in them. "I'm offering you an alliance." Evelyn should have run, but she was tired. Tired of being punished for being gentle. tired of asking permission to exist. And there was something about Alaric's calm that felt like standing next to a wall in a storm. 6 days later, in a quiet registry office with a witness who didn't know her story, Evelyn signed her name. And then she signed his. Evelyn Winter. No headlines, no gala, no champagne, just ink. And a man who looked at her like her survival was not a miracle, but a fact. Now, in the penthouse, Evelyn watched Alaric look out over London. Alaric spoke without turning. He did it on purpose. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the mug. Yes. Alaric finally faced her. Do you want me to handle it? Evelyn's first instinct was to say no. Not because she didn't want justice, but because women like her were taught to feel guilty for wanting it. She looked down at her muddy memory, at the moment Dylan had laughed. Then she looked up. No, she said quietly. I don't want you to handle it. Alaric waited. Evelyn's voice steadied. I want him to see me. I want him to understand he didn't bury me. I want him to feel, just for a moment, what it's like to be powerless in a room full of people. Alaric's expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened like a blade being drawn. Good, he said. He crossed the room and knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his, warm now, clean. Then we'll do it properly. Evelyn swallowed. How? Alaric's answer was quiet, elegant, and merciless. We invite him to believe he's about to win. Dylan Cross lived on adrenaline and appearances. Even when his company's finances looked like a dying heartbeat, he still wore expensive suits. He still posted photos on social media with captions about vision, disruption, and the future. He refused to look like a man losing, because Dylan believed one thing more than he believed in love. If people thought you were powerful, you became powerful. So when an embossed invitation arrived at his office, heavy paper, silver lettering, the Winter Group seal shining like a warning, Dylan's hands trembled with excitement he tried to hide. Winterlight Charity Gala, hosted by Alaric Winter, Winterhurst Hotel. Dylan stared at the name like it was a doorway out of hell. He had been trying to get Alaric Winter's attention for months. Cold emails, mutual connections, charity events where Dylan had accidentally ended up in the same room. Nothing. Because Winter didn't need him, and Dylan knew it. But now, an invitation, a seat, a chance. Dylan called Sienna immediately. Babe, he said, trying to sound casual. We're in. Sienna squealed. I told you I manifested this. Dylan rolled his eyes but smiled anyway. This is bigger than anything we've done. Wear your black tux, Sienna said. I'll do pink, something unforgettable. Dylan hesitated. Pink? Trust me, she purred. They'll remember us. They did remember her. Not the way she thought. Over the next 2 weeks, Dylan did what desperate men do when they think salvation is one performance away. He borrowed money from places that didn't advertise interest rates. He took funds from company accounts and called them marketing expenses. He hired a PR team to seed articles about CrossVector's imminent partnership. He bought a new watch, upgraded his shoes, booked a table upgrade at the gala through an intermediary who promised visibility. In investor meetings, Dylan leaned forward with shining eyes and said, Winter is interested. And people, afraid to miss out, paused their skepticism. Because Alaric Winter's shadow made even failing startups look like potential gold. Dylan didn't know he was stepping into a trap. Or maybe he did and he didn't care, because his pride was louder than his instincts. At the Winter penthouse, Alaric moved like a man arranging chess pieces. He didn't speak much about Dylan. He didn't rant. He didn't insult. He simply gathered information like snowfall, quiet, accumulating, impossible to ignore. Evelyn watched him sometimes with a strange mixture of comfort and fear. He called his head of security, a woman named Mara who looked like she had never been surprised in her life. He called his legal counsel. He called someone in finance who spoke in numbers like they were weapons. Evelyn sat at the kitchen island with her sketches spread out, trying to focus on fabric swatches and seams, but her mind kept sliding back to Dylan's laugh. One night, Alaric came up behind her, placed a small velvet box on the table. Evelyn looked up. "What's this?" "Open it," he said. Inside lay a necklace. The blue diamond was not just beautiful, it was mythic, the kind of stone that carried history, the kind that made people think of crowns. Evelyn's breath caught. "Alaric, this is a family piece," he said, watching her carefully. "I don't give it to women as gifts." Evelyn swallowed. "Then why are you giving it to me?" Alaric's voice was calm, but the meaning beneath it was fierce. "Because when you walk into that room, I want the world to understand something before you speak a word." Evelyn's hands trembled as she lifted the necklace. "What?" Alaric leaned closer. "You are not his leftover. You are not his regret. You are not his joke." His gaze met hers, steady. "You are winter." Evelyn's eyes burned, and in that moment she realized the gala wasn't about revenge, not truly. It was about restoration, about putting her name back where it belonged. The Winterhurst Hotel's entrance looked like a palace pretending to be a building. Cameras flashed. Cars lined up like a parade of wealth. Guests stepped onto the red carpet with practiced faces, smiling as if they weren't terrified of losing their place. Dylan arrived gripping Sienna's hand like she might keep him from falling. Sienna's pink gown was a choice. It shimmered under the lights, loud and sugary, the kind of dress that wanted to be photographed. They handed their invitation to the doorman. The doorman's smile was polite, fixed. "Mr. Cross, Miss Vale, welcome." Inside, Dylan immediately searched for the most important faces. He saw politicians with careful grins. He saw billionaires whose names didn't make headlines because they owned the headlines. He saw a few familiar tech investors and noticed how they looked through him rather than at him. Sienna whispered, "Act like you belong." Dylan nodded, forcing his shoulders back. Then a staff member approached. "Your seats," the staff member said, tone neutral. "This way." Dylan followed, expecting the center, expecting visibility. But the staff member led them along the edge of the room, past the main tables, past the stage, past the glittering heart of the event, toward the back, toward the side, toward a table near the service doors where the clink of plates and the scent of kitchen heat leaked through. Dylan stopped. "This can't be right." The staff member checked the list. "Mr. Cross, table 24. Dylan's face flushed. That's near the kitchen." "Yes, sir." Sienna's smile tightened. "Fix it." The staff member's eyes were empty with professionalism. "I'm sorry, seating is arranged by the host." By the host. By Alaric Winter. Dylan's stomach dipped. No, this was a misunderstanding. It had to be. Dylan had paid for an upgrade. He looked around, seeking someone to correct the universe. But the universe didn't care. They sat, and immediately Dylan felt it. The quiet judgment from nearby tables. The subtle glances, the whispered names. One woman leaned toward her companion and murmured, "Isn't that the cross-vector man?" The companion's lips curled. "I heard they're bleeding cash." Sienna sipped champagne too fast. "They're jealous." Dylan forced a laugh. "Of course." But his palms were damp. Then the lights shifted. A hush rolled through the room like a tide. Alaric Winter stepped onto the stage. He wore a dark suit that made him look even paler, even sharper. The room, full of powerful people, leaned toward him like plants toward light. Alaric didn't smile. He didn't need to. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low and clear. "Tonight is about children without families, and families without voices. Tonight is about what we can do when the world forgets its obligations." The words were smooth, practiced. But Dylan barely listened. He watched Alaric like a gambler watching the dealer's hands. Because Dylan's future was sitting up there. Alaric spoke about the charity briefly, then paused. His gaze swept the room as if searching. Then he said, "Before we continue, I want to introduce someone." Dylan's heart hammered. Here it is, the partnership announcement, The moment the room would finally see him. Sienna squeezed his knee under the table, her grin bright with greed. Alaric continued. Someone who has reminded me that survival is not the same as living. Someone who has shown me what dignity looks like when it has nothing left to wear. Dylan frowned. That didn't sound like business. The room murmured softly, and then a door opened near the front. A woman stepped into view, midnight blue, a blue diamond at her throat, glowing like trapped ocean. Her hair was swept back, exposing the line of her neck. Her posture was straight, not stiff, steady, like she had made peace with herself. It took Dylan's brain a second too long to recognize her. When it did, something inside him snapped. No, that wasn't Evelyn. Evelyn Hart. Evelyn, the woman he had left in pieces. Evelyn, the woman he had splashed with mud. She walked beside Alaric Winter as if she belonged at his side, as if she had always belonged there. Dylan stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Sienna whispered, "What are you doing?" Dylan couldn't answer, because Alaric placed a hand lightly at Evelyn's back and said into the microphone, "Please welcome my wife, Evelyn Winter." The room erupted, not in chaos, but in something colder. Recognition. Whispers turned into certainty, eyes turned into calculations. Dylan's lungs refused to work properly. Sienna's face went slack. "Your wife?" Dylan's mind raced, trying to find logic. How? When? Why? Evelyn looked out at the crowd, her eyes calm. She didn't seek Dylan. She didn't need to. But Dylan, burning with panic and rage, couldn't help himself. He shoved past chairs, past startled guests toward the stage. He reached Evelyn just as Alaric stepped away to greet someone. Dylan grabbed her wrist, hard. "You think you can do this?" he hissed. "You think you can just show up here and—" Evelyn's eyes met his, and there was no fear in them, just a quiet, devastating clarity. "Dylan," she said softly. Her voice was a knife wrapped in silk. Sienna arrived behind him, cheeks flushed. "Let go of her, Dylan. You're making a scene." Evelyn looked at Sienna's pink dress, then back at Dylan. "You already made the scene months ago. I'm just standing in it." Dylan's grip tightened. "You're lying. You're doing this for money. You always wanted—" He stopped because suddenly the air changed. A shadow fell over them again. Alaric Winter returned. His eyes landed on Dylan's hand around Evelyn's wrist. Something ancient and cold moved behind his calm. "Remove your hand," Alaric said. Dylan turned, fury spilling out. "This is between me and my—" Alaric cut him off with a quiet smile that wasn't kind. "You mean my wife?" The words landed like a slap. Dylan's jaw clenched. She's a con. She's playing you." Alaric's gaze didn't waver. "Is that what you tell yourself? That anyone you hurt must have deserved it?" Dylan's heart pounded. "You don't know her." Alaric leaned in slightly, voice low so only Dylan could hear. "I know enough." Then he straightened and spoke louder, not shouting, but projecting just enough for nearby guests to listen. "Mr. Cross," Alaric said, "I invited you tonight because I wanted to see what kind of man you are when you believe you're about to win." Dylan blinked. "What?" Alaric's hand lifted, and Mara, head of security, appeared behind him like a consequence. Alaric continued, "You embezzled funds from your company to create the illusion of success. You borrowed against assets you no longer control. You lied to investors using my name." Dylan's face drained. "That's not—" A man in a gray suit stepped forward, holding a folder. "Mr. Cross, these are the records." Dylan's throat tightened. This is a setup." Alaric's expression was almost bored. "No, Mr. Cross, this is arithmetic." Sienna's eyes widened, darting between faces. "Dylan?" Alaric looked at her briefly, then back at Dylan. "I will not partner with cross-vector dynamics," Alaric announced, voice carrying. "Not now, not ever." The room shifted. Investors leaned away from Dylan as if failure were contagious. Dylan's mouth opened, desperate. "You can't do this. You don't understand. My company—" Alaric's eyes held him like a freezing lake. Your company is already drowning. I'm simply removing the lie that kept it afloat. Dylan's breathing turned ragged. Evelyn, tell him you're... Evelyn finally spoke, voice calm. I'm not here to beg, she said. I'm not here to explain myself to a man who decided my life was disposable. Dylan stared at her, bewildered by her steadiness. Alaric turned slightly. Mara. Mara stepped forward. Mr. Cross, you need to leave. Dylan shook his head. No, this is my chance. Mara's voice remained even. Now. Two security guards approached. Sienna grabbed Dylan's arm, whispering fiercely, Stop! You're humiliating us. Dylan yanked his arm away. Us! This is because of her. Evelyn watched him unravel with the same quiet expression you'd have watching a stranger in the rain. Because that's what Dylan had become, a stranger. Security took Dylan by the elbows and began escorting him toward the exit. Dylan shouted, twisting, Evelyn, you think you've won? Evelyn didn't answer. She simply lifted her chin, the blue diamond catching the light like a cold star. And Dylan, dragged across the ballroom under 1,000 watching eyes, finally understood. He hadn't just lost a deal. He had lost the power to define her. The next morning, Dylan woke with his mouth tasting like metal and his phone vibrating like a heartbeat in crisis. He sat up, blinking at the gray light filtering through his luxury apartment's curtains. Sienna wasn't in bed. A notification flashed. Cross-Vector Dynamics stock plummets after Winter Group statement. Another. Investor pulls out. We can't risk association. Another. Bank freezes accounts pending review. Dylan's stomach dropped. He threw on clothes, stumbling toward his laptop. Numbers bled across the screen. Red, red, red. He called his CFO. No answer. He called his lawyer. Voicemail. He called Sienna. Ring, ring. Finally, click. Sienna's voice was sharp. What? Where are you? Dylan demanded. A pause. I'm packing. Dylan's throat tightened. What? Sienna exhaled, impatient. Dylan, don't be dramatic. I'm not being... Sienna, I need you here. You need a miracle, she snapped. And I'm not one. Dylan's voice rose. After everything, after what I've done for you... Sienna laughed, cold and bright. What you've done for me? You mean the dinners and the photos? Babe, I did those for you. I was your image. Dylan froze. You're leaving. I'm leaving, she confirmed, tone final. Because I'm not going down with you. You can't just... I can, Sienna said softly. And I am. Click. The line went dead. Dylan stared at his phone like it had betrayed him. But the phone wasn't the betrayal. It was the truth. Within hours, his world began to collapse in practical, humiliating ways. The bank called. Polite voice, sharp terms. Mr. Cross, due to the recent developments, your accounts are under review. Review. A word that sounded clean and meant ruin. His credit card stopped working. His assistant resigned. A reporter waited outside his building with questions like knives. His landlord emailed about arrears and future arrangements. And then, the worst part. Cross-Vector's board scheduled an emergency meeting. Dylan arrived late, sweating, trying to look composed in a suit that suddenly felt too tight. In the conference room, faces that used to smile at him now looked away. His CFO, finally present, didn't meet his eyes. One board member, an older man with tired eyes, slid a folder across the table. We've reviewed the accounts, the man said quietly. Dylan's stomach twisted. You're overreacting. This is temporary. Winter is done, the man interrupted. And now we have to protect what's left. Dylan's voice cracked. Protect from what? The older man's gaze was heavy. From you. Dylan's breath caught. The room blurred. He thought of Evelyn, standing in midnight blue, not begging. He thought of Alaric's voice. This is arithmetic. And he realized something horrifying. No amount of charm could sweet-talk numbers. No amount of arrogance could intimidate consequences. Dylan was removed from his own company with the same clean efficiency Alaric had removed him from the ballroom. By evening, moving trucks waited outside his building, not for him, but for the bank. His Porsche was towed. His apartment was listed. His life was itemized and repossessed. He stood on the pavement watching strangers carry out his furniture, and for the first time in his life, Dylan Cross looked like what he truly was. A man who had mistaken attention for love and power for permanence. Rain began to fall. Not heavy, not dramatic, just enough to make the pavement shine. Just enough to make Dylan remember a woman standing under that same sky, holding a portfolio like a lifeline. He had laughed then. Now, no one laughed. A year passed. London moved on the way cities always do, without apology. Cross-vector dynamics became a case study in business schools. The dangers of image over substance. Dylan Cross's name was spoken in lectures like a cautionary tale. He didn't disappear dramatically. He didn't end up in prison in a cinematic twist. He simply shrank. Dylan found work in a stationery supply shop on the outskirts of the city, selling paper and printer cartridges to office managers who didn't recognize him. His hair thinned slightly, his shoulders slumped. His suits were old now, shiny at the elbows. Sometimes he'd catch his reflection in the shop window and flinch, because the man staring back looked like someone who had lost a war without realizing he'd been fighting one. He lived in a small rented room with thin walls. There were no cameras there, no admiration, only silence and the echo of his own choices. One afternoon, a customer came in holding a black folder wrapped in plastic. Dylan's hands froze. It wasn't Evelyn, just a stranger, but the sight sent a cold ripple through him. He rang up the purchase, avoiding the customer's eyes, because guilt didn't shout. It waited. Across the city, Evelyn's life grew in the opposite direction. Quietly, steadily, like light returning after a long winter. She didn't become famous overnight. She didn't turn into a glamorous headline. She worked. She sketched in the mornings with tea and soft music. She met with suppliers. She learned to negotiate without apologizing. She built a small studio where the walls were covered in fabric swatches and her own designs, her name on every page. Alaric never tried to control her work. He simply made space for it. When Evelyn had her first major client, a boutique hotel chain that wanted her interiors, she almost backed out. "What if I fail?" she whispered one night. Alaric looked at her calmly. "Then you fail in your own name. That's still winning." Evelyn laughed, breath shaking, and she succeeded. Not because Alaric was rich, but because Evelyn was talented, and she finally believed she deserved to be. They adopted a little girl that spring, not as a publicity gesture, not as a charity accessory, because one day at the foster center, Evelyn had knelt down and offered the child a pencil. The girl had taken it, suspicious. "What's this for?" Evelyn had smiled softly. "To draw a door." "A door to where?" Evelyn's voice had been gentle. "Somewhere safe." The girl drew a messy rectangle with a crooked handle. Evelyn's eyes had filled with tears. Alaric had watched them quietly, and for a moment the Ice King of London looked almost human. "What is her name?" the social worker asked. Evelyn glanced at Alaric, then down at the child. "Leora," Evelyn said. "It means light." Because after mud, after rain, after humiliation, Evelyn wanted to raise light. On the anniversary of the gala, Evelyn walked with Alaric through Mayfair. It was raining again, of course. London loved its cycles. They shared a black umbrella. Leora walked between them, holding Evelyn's hand with sticky fingers that smelled faintly of jam. They approached the same stretch of pavement where Evelyn had stood a year ago, soaked and shaking. A puddle lay near the curb, mud collected at the edges. Evelyn paused. For a second, she saw herself there again. The woman with nothing but a portfolio and a wound. Alaric noticed her stillness. "Are you all right?" Evelyn looked up at him. There was no hatred in her now, no obsession with Dylan, only the calm of someone who had outgrown the need for revenge because she had built a life bigger than her pain. "I'm fine," she said softly, but this time, it wasn't a lie. Leora tugged her hand. "Mama, can we jump?" Evelyn smiled. "Not in your nice shoes." Leora pouted. Alaric's mouth twitched. "Let her." Evelyn blinked at him. "You're encouraging chaos." Alaric's eyes held hers, and the coldness in them softened just a fraction. "I'm encouraging joy." Evelyn looked down at Leora, then nodded. "All right," she said. "One jump." Leora squealed and jumped, splashing a little mud, laughing like the world couldn't hurt her. Evelyn felt something warm spread through her chest. The umbrella tilted slightly as Alaric adjusted it to keep them covered. They stepped around the puddle, not because they feared it, but because they didn't need to prove anything to it. They walked forward, together, into the rain, toward the lights of the street. And the mud stayed behind them, exactly where it belonged, on the ground, not on her soul. If this story stayed with you, if you've ever stood in the rain feeling like the world turned your pain into a joke, leave a comment with a single word you wish someone had told you back then. You're not alone, and you're not finished.